served for 6 years, spending the better part of that time forward deployed overseas. Following his honorable discharge from the military, he returned to Georgia. Ryan began his career with the field of criminal justice shortly thereafter. He specialized in working complex cases involving major felonies, violent crimes, such as murder, rape, and armed robbery, cold cases, and crimes against children. Having spent 20 years at work within the criminal justice system, Ryan walked away to focus his time and energy to draw attention to the need for top-to-bottom reform. Ryan has a unique perspective with first-hand experience on the inner workings of the criminal justice system. He concentrates his effort on education, training, and opening positive dialogue as the catalyst for needed change. Ryan writes for an online publication, the Piedmont Chronicles, where he spotlights identified issues at local and state government levels and reimagines them with a libertarian and constitutional point of view. Ryan is an advocate for smaller, less intrusive, and more efficient government. He also champions the need for better agrarian practices and conservationist principles. In his spare time, Ryan writes fiction, reads just about everything he can get his hands on, and enjoys spending time outdoors hiking, camping, and kayaking. He is a Boston Red Sox baseball fanatic. Ryan married his high school sweetheart, Wanda. They have 3 wonderful children, Jade, Riley, and Gracie. So thank you so much. Please give him a warm welcome.
Hey, thank you guys for coming out. I appreciate the Heck House for hosting it, and I appreciate Viva for the invitation to come out and speak. I have to sit down because of my bad back. So I met Aviva through a mutual friend, Catherine Bernard. Catherine hosts weekly meetings on Zoom for fellow lovers of liberty like myself. And this past week, I've been following what Aviva was doing online, and received an invitation for her to come out and speak today, which I was quite excited to do. We discussed briefly some of the topics that she would like for me to speak about, and so I sat down yesterday and I've got 14 pages worth of notes, so I have to limit myself to about 25 or 30 minutes. So I'll see if I can do that. I can talk relatively quick if need be. So I wanted to start by just telling a little story. If you guys can hear me, if you guys can't hear me, I can speak louder. Did you know that there existed an industrial revolution, seldom spoken about, that occurred in America over 40 years ago? It positively impacted millions of lives, yet garnered little notoriety. The notion of public laundry gained traction in the 1950s as the popularity of laundromats increased. Unfortunately, with amplified demand came industry complacency and the deterioration of customer service. Almost 20 years later, investors were all but ready to abandon the industry. That is, until several small business owners took it upon themselves, took matters into their own hands through a self-edification process. They were single-handedly able to identify several problematic issues, and by doing so, recognized and focused their attention on the overwhelming need to return to a hands-on approach to laundromat management. They invested in equipment maintenance, janitorial services, and extra customer-related services, such as dry cleaning, wash and fold, and tailoring. By 1976, following a steady decline in the interest of public laundry, the self-service laundry industry witnessed a revolutionary rebirth. This obscure reckoning was the catalyst that kick-started by a small group of knowledgeable business owners that forever changed the public laundromat industry. Everyone needs clean clothes, and no one knows this better than today's entrepreneur starting a commercial coin-operated laundry business. The guaranteed demand ensures the need for their product. However, the startup costs are significant. Depending on your choice of equipment, establishing your own small laundry business may cost anywhere between $250,000 to $1 million. The price of commercial washing and drying equipment varies from around $100,000 to $400,000 depending on the complexity of its technology. The coin-operated laundry industry underwent a much-needed modernization. No longer are they drab, risky places customers must endure. Laundromats have been transformed into an enjoyable, attractive gathering place that customers actually look forward to utilizing. The industry had a facelift. It is important to understand the principle that guides the decision-making process on purchasing new equipment: the first cost versus true ownership. The price of equipment is not a one-time investment. First cost is the initial expenditure. In the context of the laundromat is the price tag displayed on the washing and drying equipment that is to be purchased by the business owner. True cost ownership includes first cost plus an installation cost, operating cost, and maintenance cost calculated over the lifetime of the equipment. Historically, the lowest cost equipment ends up costing more to operate over the lifetime than the more expensive model. The present-day entrepreneur equipping a new laundromat has a better understanding of the true cost of ownership of the equipment than their predecessor. Realizing the higher cost in equipment, today's entrepreneur is looking long-term and basing their first cost purchases on the life cycle and increased performance-based standards. It is vital to have a view of the future and communicate that to your distributor prior to purchasing the initial equipment. Education and the need for operational efficiency brought about this fundamental change in the commercial coin-operated laundry industry. So what does the overhaul of the commercial laundry system have to do with a more efficient government and our criminal justice system as a whole? The answer is simple: more than what you might think. Educational efficiency is important at all societal levels, perhaps none more important than the benefits found to both society and to individuals when applied in pursuit of a properly functioning government while reforming our criminal justice system. Efficiency occurs when yield from education, like a knowledgeable voter holding an elected official accountable for their actions, are delivered at the local level, such as city council members, county commissioners, district attorneys, solicitors, magistrate court and superior court judges, and sheriffs. This alone does not ensure an absence of their political byproduct, which would be societal division. The startup cost to an ill-advised voter who elects a self-serving politician all but guarantees regression. A prime example of this can be witnessed through the examination of our current political criminal justice system. Political polarization is at an all-time high. Incumbents in Georgia enjoy the electoral advantage, relying on party ideology, winning re-election over 90% of the time. This phenomenon suggests true cost ownership depending on the choice of political party, and ensures that we will have long-term devastating consequences on our communities. The two-party political system ensures our elected officials can, with impunity, diverge from the stated preferences of the voter. No longer is the will of the people being imposed by the politician. In fact, just the opposite occurs. The impact on the consciousness of our state and nation is currently influencing our lives in a negative manner, but it may also affect the representation we receive in the future. The absence of consequence for failure by our politicians to adequately represent our constituency all but guarantees an unresponsive candidate or elected official. When incumbents do not care what voters want, and voters do not care what incumbents do, this yields indifference, and this indifference yields complacency. Whether one votes Democrat or Republican, it doesn't matter. It's important to understand the principle that guides the decision-making process of the politician. Of sole importance to them would be the gain and maintaining of power. Inversely, to laundry equipment, it is the higher price bought and paid for incumbent that does the most damage to our community. We must examine the true cost of an election, keeping in mind that elections do matter and have consequences. One of the largest expenses on the city or county budget are our police departments, sometimes surpassing over 50% of the budget. Over the last 2 weeks, we have witnessed, during 24-hour cable news segments, examples of where and how that money has been used. Such behavior has drawn the ire of our country and the world, and rightfully so. As a result, there have been cries for local elected officials to cut some funding to law enforcement agencies and to redirect those funds to other areas within local government. However, what is not being addressed is how do we limit the other areas of government interference in our lives once they receive additional funds. Reducing the overall size of government is something that we should all get behind and take seriously, and here's why. In theory, if the size of government is reduced, it would require less taxpayer funds to operate. The end result is a possible reduction in the amount of taxes that we would pay annually. A city or county's general fund is not the sole source of a police department's funding. There are specific allotments in the budget designated for law enforcement purposes. Nevertheless, law enforcement budgets are frequently supplemented by the fees from citations and fines if one is adjudicated guilty in court. Moreover, many agencies rely on seized funds, also known as civil asset forfeiture, to supplement their budgets and to operate. When law enforcement budgets are cut, civil asset forfeiture cases increase. And when budgets are increased, civil asset forfeiture cases decrease. Fees from citations, fines from court, and civil asset forfeiture cases can supplement a law enforcement agency's budget by up to 30%. Civil asset forfeiture is an authorized procedure, meaning that it is lawful, that permits law enforcement officials to seize property they assert was involved in criminal activity. It charges the property itself with the involvement in a crime, allowing law enforcement to seize cars, homes, cash, or other valuables without ever having to charge an individual person with a crime. These type of cases typically involve illegal drug-related activity. Taken directly from the DEA's website, by definition, forfeiture is the government taking of property that has been illegally used or acquired without compensating the owner. The United States government uses asset forfeiture to seize and forfeit property from those individuals involved in a crime which may benefit law enforcement and the DEA for one moment, which benefits law enforcement. So what that means is law enforcement can and will seize your property for their personal gain and your loss. To get your property back, owners must navigate a costly and time-consuming legal process. Law enforcement agencies and prosecutors want to keep the proceeds, which creates incentive to seize even more personal property, regardless of the fact that little to no evidence exists linking the property to a crime. Between 2001 and 2014, law enforcement officials nationwide seized cash and goods worth an estimated $29 billion. According to the Washington Post, since 2008, 298 police departments and 210 drug task forces nationwide have seized the equivalent of 20% or more of their annual budgets. The Washington Post also found law enforcement took more property from American citizens than a burglar did in 2014. During the past 20 years, the federal government alone has seized $36.5 billion in assets from Americans, many of whom were never even charged with a crime. Most of the money seized during the civil process returns to the law enforcement agency that seized it, allowing them to supplement their budgets and providing for funds for a variety of needs, including the purchase of paramilitary equipment, vehicles, travel, and training. Civil asset forfeiture is a controversial tactic employed by law enforcement established on the falsehood that property, and not the individual, can be a criminal. This practice bypasses the Fourth Amendment's guarantee that Americans are free from unreasonable search and seizure, and it provides a corrupting incentive for police to circumvent the law to supplement their budgets. Civil asset forfeiture and theft are one and the same. It poses one of the greatest threats to personal property rights our nation faces. Property is being seized regardless of the owner's guilt or innocence. The burden of proof is not beyond reasonable doubt, which makes it easier for law enforcement to seize the property. All law enforcement must prove, based on the preponderance of the evidence, is that the property might be related to a crime, or there is no likely source other than criminal activity that you would have used to gain that particular property. Most seizures of cash because of traffic stops do not lead to formal criminal charges being filed against the involved party, but nevertheless, law enforcement keeps the money, again for their benefit. Local police departments sidestep state restrictions on the use of forfeited seized property through what's called the Federal Equitable Sharing Program, under which the Department of Justice adopts a forfeiture and sends 80% of that money back to the agency to spend as they see fit. This circumvention of the law washes the hands clean of local law enforcement agency heads. Police departments are required to file reports showing how they spend the seized funds, with little to no accountability and oversight existing. Even if the discrepancies are discovered, the agency charged to investigate a purported wrongdoing is the local district attorney's office, who themselves receive a portion of the seized funds to supplement their annual budgets. Police departments have become addicted to utilizing seized funds, and without them, many would not survive facing today's economic challenges. The Federal Equitable Sharing Program is the catalyst for local law enforcement's dependency on seized property. The seizures are nothing more than vaguely disguised theft wrapped in morality. The Department of Justice itself acknowledges that it has little to no oversight of the Equitable Sharing Program, acknowledging that they failed to advance methodology to, and I quote, oversee their seizure operations or to determine whether seizures benefit criminal investigations or the extent to which they pose potential risk to civil liberties. The risks to civil liberties are particularly significant when seizures that do not relate to criminal investigations are conducted without a court-issued warrant, the presence of illicit narcotics, or a subsequent judicial involvement. Furthermore, the DOJ concedes that they have no control over a questionable program that may violate one's civil liberties, yet local law enforcement agencies continue to engage in this practice. Local law enforcement agencies defend the need for civil asset forfeiture. They argue it plays an important role in saving taxpayer money by supplementing departmental budgets that would otherwise be unable to support the rising costs of their travel, training, and the purchase of vehicles, firearms, and other miscellaneous equipment. Locally, law enforcement groups like the Georgia Sheriff's Association, whose members can make or break a political party, have opposed restrictions to civil asset forfeiture. For example, in 1996, the U.S. Supreme Court embraced the notion of property as being an offender. The case involved a woman named Tina Bennis, whose husband, John, was caught by the Detroit Police Department engaging in illegal activity with a prostitute inside the family car. The authorities declared the car to be a public nuisance and seized it. Tina Bennis, who knew nothing of her husband's escapades, claimed she should not have lost her half of the car. The U.S. Supreme Court disagreed, ruling 5-4. At the time, Chief Justice William Rehnquist based his decision on an early 19th century precedent involving the Palmyra, a ship commissioned as a privateer by the King of Spain to attack U.S. ships. A 19th century court ruled the thing here is considered as the offender, and Judge Rehnquist agreed. In 2017, Justice Clarence Thomas, in response to Rehnquist, wrote that the court should not tolerate harsh and unfair historical practice from the colonial era. These forfeiture operations frequently target the poor and other groups least able to defend their interests. A year later, while speaking about other civil asset forfeiture cases involving a stopped motorist in Indiana, Justice Neil Gorsuch ridiculed the view of Justice Rehnquist, saying during oral argument, here we are in 2018 still litigating the incorporation of the Bill of Rights. Really? Come on. Justice Sonia Sotomayor quipped, if you look at these forfeitures that are occurring today, many of these seem grossly disproportionate to the crimes being charged. The libertarian point of view about civil asset forfeiture is simple. Private property should be protected from government overreach, and the DOJ's incompetent dominance of the civil asset forfeiture nullifies the effectiveness of state law enforcement forfeiture reform. The law that earmarks civil asset forfeiture funds for law enforcement passed with bipartisan support during the height of America's declared war on drugs, which by and large has been an abysmal human rights violation in and of itself. Attorney General Eric Holder, under the Obama administration, reformed the Equitable Sharing Program in 2015 to require criminal charges or warrants before federal adoptions of forfeited property could proceed. Attorney General Jeff Sessions, under the Trump administration, reversed Holder's decision Sessions said, "Our law enforcement partners will tell you, and as President Trump knows well, asset forfeitures is a key tool that helps law enforcement defund organized crime, take back ill-gotten gains, and prevent new crimes from being committed. It also weakens the criminals and the cartels." In Georgia, civil asset forfeiture is a matter of law found underneath the Official Code of Georgia 16-13-49. Excuse me. So where do we go from here? In theory, we need to go back to the start. The United States is a constitutional republic, a form of government in which a representative is elected by the people to govern according to the law established by a constitution. The U.S. Constitution only contains 4,543 words. Incidentally, there are more words typed on these pages right here that I hold in my hand that are contained in the entire U.S. Constitution. It has only been amended 17 times since 1791. The smartness found in this minimalism, it defines the organization and structure of the entire federal government while establishing control over the scope and limitation of its power. The U.S. Constitution is the highest law of the land, and all other laws are measured against it. Constitutions are meant to be long-lasting. They preserve stability within their framework in areas where debatable matters of law are concerned. The fundamentals of a constitution are uncomplicated. The main principle of a constitution remains to legally limit the powers of a government because government legitimacy depends on adherence to the contained restrictions. Along with adherence to the U.S. Constitution, each state has its own constitution and body of constitutional law. State constitutions are like the U.S. Constitution. They contain a Bill of Rights, define the organization of government, outline its limitation of power, and establish its secure structure into three but equal separate branches of government: the executive, the legislative, and the judicial. State constitutions do diverge from the U.S. Constitution. State constitutions are much more detailed. They average around 8,500 words and focus more on limiting rather than granting power. The details in state constitutions address specific issues unique to that state. State constitutions are subject to frequent change, which we call amendments, and amendments can be proposed by legislation, a citizen's petition, or a referendum. For example, the Constitution of Georgia has been replaced in its entirety a total of 9 times. The current version that we use was ratified in 1983. So what can we do? Being informed and getting involved is the difference between change and maintaining the status quo. Participation in local government guarantees that your voice will be heard and represented. Typically, less than 21% of those of voting age cast ballots in local elections. With such low voter turnout, if the electorate, which means all of us, would simply increase that percentage by about 5 to 10 points, it would be a game changer against incumbent politicians. Local officials are there to represent us all, and when a large portion of the electorate fails to vote, it leads to bias. Increasing local voter turnout will improve minority representation, and in this illustration, minority representation means that of the losing party. The result is a government more indicative of its entire community. Aversion is a common sentiment when it comes to voters' view on the national political level, but no level of government is more accountable to its constituency than those officials elected at the local level. Local government was supposed to be the sanctuary where things got done in a more proficient manner, with less red tape than, let's say, dealing with the IRS. Unfortunately, it has not worked out in our favor. More than a quarter of Georgia voters, both Republicans and Democrats, say that their local elected officials are not responsive to their needs. This disparaging attitude among voters leads one to consider the pointlessness of local political participation. A higher percentage, roughly 36%, of independent voters, those not aligned with a political party, were far more negative in their belief that local governments were operating on behalf of the people. This decline in confidence is being felt at the polls as well, with many local voters choosing non-participation during local elections. The widespread sense is, it just doesn't matter, so why should I bother? A marginalized voter with an I could care less attitude is exactly what a local incumbent politician wants. Low voter turnout secures their re-election. Individual dissent is necessary to the health of our democracy. Both political parties have forsaken half the electorate, and in some instances more than half. There is nothing organizational about a two-party system that guarantees moderate parties must possess broad appeal. We have now, instead of elections giving voters a meaningful choice between well-thought-out alternatives, all we have now is just a political mess. This disarray fails to generate legitimate responses to issues by a representative government and leads to authoritative oppression. Sometimes we'll call that tyranny, by a simple majority, meaning a winning political party. The result remains low voter turnout, division, gridlock, and erosion of consensus and tendencies for voters to drift towards political extremes. So this is not a matter of equality, we can do better. Politicians channel voter frustration into embellished promises about how they can and will fix a problem that they created. By this point, partisanship becomes inescapable. As Americans, we are no longer attached to the spirit of independence, but we are shackled to the normalcy of a corrupt political system. The problem with going against the grain is the resulting exclusion and discredit of ideas by those two political parties. The challenge for us then becomes how to shift the alignment of a political conflict away from a battle over state institutions and to more of a discussion about returning to a democracy rooted in constitutional adherence and the implementation of laws that do not restrict liberty. The answer must involve a third party. This would give a more fluid response to a political system more in line with our constitutional foundation. And do not be fooled, this is a major task, and this change will not come easily. But at this point, anything less seems futile. And lastly, the most important question, and which Aviva asked me to speak about today, is how do we start this conversation as individuals and bridge this gap? First, we must educate ourselves, much like that small group of laundromat owners did nearly 45 years ago, and we must be willing to act. They identified an issue and took matters into their own hands, and by doing so, revitalized an entire industry. This conversation must begin locally. It must begin here, and it must begin now. It's long overdue. And like the laundromat owners, it needs to be thoughtful, well-articulated, organized, and purposeful. So for illustrative purposes, let's replace the laundromat scenario with government. Let's replace industry complacency and the deterioration of customer service with low voter turnout and allow the terminology, the deterioration of customer service, to stand. Because after all, elected officials work for us. They are our employees, and at this point, they all have poor performance records. Let's replace the investment of equipment, maintenance, janitorial services, and extra customer-related services like the dry cleaning, the wash and folding, and the tailoring with the investment in ourselves, others, our community, our state, and nation. When looked at from this perspective, we see the true cost of ownership of a failed government and of our elected officials who refuse to serve the general public. The answer to this question remains potentially complex, but if broken down in the simplest of terms, it's more easily digested. So there are 7 points, and they're really straightforward. The first is the overcriminalization of society must end. Where excessive laws exist, our conduct and liberty are subject to countless forms of restriction and potential violation. If there exists no victim, then there exists no crime. This will reduce police officer to citizen encounters, free up monetary resources within local governments being used unnecessarily and inefficiently, and protect citizens from malicious prosecution. Police must decriminalize and stop using law enforcement as a revenue-generating mechanism for failed government budgeting. This also includes the elimination of no-knock search warrants. We must demand transparency of our government. After all, they are our employees and should be treated as such. Elected officials are beholden to us. They drive around in cars, sit behind desks, send emails, and answer phones that we provide through taxation. We must end qualified immunity and hold government officials accountable for their actions. They are not in a class of citizenry above us. They are our equals. We must end the war on drugs. It is an abysmal human rights violation that has caused more death and destruction than we could possibly count and maintain statistics of. Another thing that we can do locally is end occupational licensing, such as requiring hairdressers, massage therapists, barbers to not only go to school, graduate school, apply for a license, but then we're going to charge them additional fees to maintain that license at a local and state level, and they've already paid for the education. So the only thing that we need to do in that situation is just let free market work itself out. So what does the overhaul of the commercial laundry system have to do with a more efficient government and our criminal justice system? The answer is more than you think. Everyone needs clean clothes, but not everyone needs politicians. So what I was able to do this morning before coming out here, really at Aviva's request, was to get on the Secretary of State's website, the Georgia Secretary of State's website, and print out examples of ballots for next Tuesday's election, as long as print out examples of how you can educate yourself by going online, entering in which race you want to research, looking at all the candidates who have applied and received to be put on the ballot, and then you have their contact information, whether it's a telephone number or email address by those candidates. It tells you whether or not they are in the incumbent. It tells you the political party that they associate with. So take it upon yourself to reach out to those candidates. If it's an election or if it's a race that is important to you, reach out to them and ask them questions, send emails, make phone calls, stop by their offices. If they're not willing to give you the answer that you want, you need to demand it, because they're the ones who are working for us. So Aviva's got some of the documentation that I printed out that I could at least share a little bit with you and just kind of show you how easy it is to educate yourself just locally about what's going on in races throughout Metro Atlanta. And I've also got points of contact if you're interested for various local registrars, and points of contact with the Secretary of State's office who oversee election issues on the date of elections. So I'm going to stand up now. So some important dates that are coming up. So some important dates that are coming up for us locally. Tuesday, June 9th is election. And so those results are going to carry over into November, where we're going to have a general election, and during that general election, you're going to have local issues on the ballot as well as national issues. So what I did this morning was, and Aviva can walk it around, I just printed up an example directly off of the Secretary of State's website, of the local ballot example out of Newton County, because that's where I'm registered to vote. So it has any amendments, it has a list of all the candidates that are running and qualify for office. And it's just something that you can take a look at prior to going out to the polls, especially if this is your first time voting and you're unfamiliar with what the ballot itself is going to look like. Any of this information that I'm sharing now, I took directly off the Secretary of State's website. It's publicly accessible, and anyone can get it. It's free. There's no charge for it. So the Secretary of State's liaison for DeKalb County, Fulton County, Gwinnett County, and Cobb County is Miss Lee Combs. And I'll let Aviva in a minute walk it around, but provided her phone number, her fax number, and her email address. I've also included the election supervisor for those counties, as well as their mailing address, their phone number, their fax number, and their email. So if you have any questions, if you live in those counties, and you have any questions about what's on the ballot and what you're voting for, reach out to them. If you feel like there's an issue when you get to the polling place, and you feel like something maybe is not going the way it should, reach out to them prior to. They're a wealth of information. They're there to help you, and especially if you're a first-time voter, I assure you they're going to be willing to answer any questions that you have.
Do you have any,
So I'm a little biased as a libertarian, but I'm going to be voting for Shane Hazel for U.S. Senate. If you guys don't know who Shane Hazel is, just ask that you check him out on Facebook, look at him on social media, look at his policies and procedures, look over his ideology. Shane is actively engaging in the political process here in Georgia. Shane has also developed a grassroots campaign, and Shane is pro a lot of things that I believe in, including his stance on cannabis, including his stance on hemp, including his stance on the Second Amendment. So I just would offer that as an alternative if you're looking for a third-party candidate in the U.S. Senate race. So for example, if you lived in Gwinnett County, for example, if you lived in Gwinnett County and you were concerned about who was qualifying as a candidate for a Board 1 commissioner, you can enter in that criteria on the Secretary of State's website, and you'll yield the following results. So it's really easy to go on there. It's easy to navigate. It's easy to enter in the criteria, and it gives you a nice printout of the results that you can take and study, to include email addresses, contact information, and where their campaign is headquartered out of. One of the easiest things to do for first-time voters, there's a link on the Secretary of State's website called MVP, which stands for My Voter Page. So what you do is it takes about, 5 to 10 seconds. You don't even really have to register per se. Click on the link, you enter in your first initial, your last name, you enter in your full date of birth, you enter in the county where you believe you're registered to vote, and it'll pull up all your information. So this right here tells you exactly where your polling place is on election day. It gives you directions. It gives you the hours of operation. If you do this prior to election day during the early voting cycle, it also gives you directions to your early voting location and their times. If you're within a municipality, it also gives you directions to their polling place as well. If you want to request an absentee ballot, you request that off of your MVP page. And it gives you links here that you can click on. If you request that ballot and submit it, and you want to know what your status is, it gives you updates right here, and this is of no cost to you. It also gives you a breakdown of who your elected officials are based on where you're registered to vote. So it'll give you a link where you can click on candidates that are elected statewide. It also breaks down your congressional district map. It lets you know where you stand in the U.S. Congressional District, the Georgia Senate District, the Georgia House District. It lets you know what judicial circuit you're a part of, which is very important. It also lets you know what district your local county commissioner is, what school board you're a member of, and then it actually gives you a link where you can find out a little more about all those elected officials. So this is a really good tool that you can use. I recommend any first-time voter take a look at this. It's of no charge. It literally took me about 5 to 7 seconds, and I got all these printouts. If you want to know what's going on as far as like the calendar of events for your election cycles, It's all on the website. So if you guys have any questions, I'll open myself up to questions. Otherwise, I just want to thank Aviva and the Heck House for having me out here today and just kind of giving me the opportunity to share this information with you all.
Yay! Woo! Yay!
I think